Trump launched a public attack on Michelle Obama that stunned the room, but Barack Obama's measured response quickly became the clip Americans couldn't stop replaying. It began with a simple question. During a live White House press briefing, a CNN reporter asked President Trump about his administration's plans for the next phase of education reform. Cameras rolled, the room tense but routine, until Trump, with his familiar mix of bravado and impatience, leaned into the microphone and said words that would dominate headlines: Michelle Obama's school nutrition program. He scoffed. A total disaster. Kids hated it. A failure led by someone who should have stayed out of politics. The room went silent for a heartbeat, long enough that every reporter instinctively glanced around, unsure whether to move forward or wait. Trump noticed the reaction and smirked. "I mean, people liked pizza, not kale," he added. A few awkward laughs, some typing, some stunned faces, all registering the moment. Within minutes, phones buzzed across the press room. Producers, anchors, editors, everyone sending the same urgent message: "We've got a clip." Trump moved on to trade questions, but the damage had been done. The insult wasn't just policy-related, it was personal. Michelle Obama, admired for her grace, poise, and efforts to improve school meals, had been publicly mocked. Outside, Washington basked in a clear afternoon. Inside newsrooms from New York to Los Angeles, storm clouds were forming. By the time Trump finished, the clip was already spreading online. On Twitter, captions read, "Trump mocks Michelle Obama," and "New low from the president." Comment sections filled with outrage and defense alike, supporters praising his honesty, critics calling it petty and disrespectful. What amplified the moment wasn't just the words, it was the target. Michelle Obama wasn't simply a former first lady, she was a symbol of dignity in a polarized era. Trump's jab felt personal. Back at the White House, reporters buzzed with excitement. "Did you get that soundbite?" one whispered to another. "We're leading with it." Trump seemed unfazed, straightened his tie, grinned, and quipped, "Maybe we'll get some real food back in schools now." A camera flash captured a still that would appear on front pages nationwide. CNN ran the headline, "Trump takes aim at Michelle Obama during education Q&A." Fox News went with, "Trump criticizes failed school lunch plan." On social media, the raw 18-second clip went viral, shared with outrage, humor, disbelief. Late-night comedians were already drafting jokes. Hashtags emerged, hashtag Michelle deserved better, hashtag stay classy Mr. President. In Chicago, Barack Obama's phone buzzed. His aide, Eric Schultz, appeared in the doorway. "Sir, have you seen what the president just said about Michelle?" Obama looked up from a folder. Calm, steady. "Not yet." "Should I?" Eric handed him a tablet. Obama watched silently, corners of his mouth tightening but expression composed. When it ended, he set the tablet down. "That's unfortunate," he said quietly. Michelle, across the room preparing notes for a charity event, murmured, "He'll say anything for attention." "You're not going to respond?" "Not yet," Barack replied, though he paused. But sometimes silence says the wrong thing. The exchange was brief but heavy with understanding. Every word, every pause, every breath would be scrutinized. Obama had navigated moments like this for 8 years, but this was different. It wasn't about him, it was about Michelle. As the day progressed, cable networks dissected the clip, analysts debated whether Trump had crossed a line or simply expressed his mind. Meanwhile, Obama's inner circle weighed how, or whether, to respond. By evening, it was clear the nation was split again, not just by politics, but by tone, by decency, by expectations of leadership. Amid the growing noise, something subtle began to emerge. Barack Obama wasn't going to remain silent for long. By sunset, the clip had taken on a life of its own. It wasn't just news, it was a national conversation. Social media platforms flooded with reactions. Millions had seen it, millions more were discussing it. Online, Trump supporters defended him fiercely, "He's just saying what everyone thinks." One comment under a Fox News post read, "Michelle Obama ruined school lunches." Others spun memes, swapping pizzas for salads, joking about cafeteria scenes. On the other side, criticism spread rapidly. "This isn't leadership," one tweet read. "Michelle Obama worked to make kids healthier, and this is how she's treated." Celebrities chimed in. Chrissy Teigen tweeted, "Leave Michelle out of your mess." Ellen DeGeneres shared a 2016 clip of Michelle, reminding everyone, "When they go low, we go high." Soon, her words were everywhere, reposted as a rallying cry, tagging both Barack and Michelle, daring them to respond. Inside the White House press office, the tension only grew. Trump's communications team scrambled. They knew the clip was spreading faster than anyone expected. Outside the West Wing, Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders faced a cluster of reporters. "The president was simply expressing his opinion about a failed policy," she said evenly. "He has great respect for all former first ladies." Her words barely slowed the storm. News anchors ran split screens, Trump on one side, clips of Michelle serving lunches to children on the other. The contrast was stark. At a downtown Atlanta cafe, a group of college students huddled around a phone, watching the clip for the 5th time. "It's not just disrespect," one girl muttered, shaking her head. "It's childish." Her friend shrugged. "Classic Trump, say something wild and watch everyone chase it." Meanwhile, in a Tulsa diner, older men saw it differently. "He's got guts," one said, sipping coffee. About time someone called them out. America was arguing again, circles spinning around tone and decency, yet beneath the chaos, an undercurrent of anticipation was building. People were waiting to see if Obama would respond. By early evening, journalists in Chicago learned he was scheduled to speak at a youth development event that night. The timing seemed almost scripted. Outside the Harold Washington Cultural Center, news trucks began arriving hours ahead of schedule. Staffers whispered in the hallways. "Do you think he'll address it?" one asked. "He has to," another replied. "He can't just let that slide." Inside the Obama Foundation office, Michelle reviewed notes for her book tour. Her assistant entered, phone in hand. "Hashtag lift people up is trending," she said softly. Michelle frowned. "But he hasn't said anything yet." "It started with your old quote," the assistant explained. "People are using it as a reminder. This is what leadership looks like." Michelle smiled faintly and sighed. "Let's hope they remember that tomorrow too." As night fell, cable networks moved from speculation to countdown. "All eyes are on Chicago tonight," one anchor said. Will Barack Obama respond to the president's comments? Across the country, families tuned in, some expecting fireworks, others silence. A retired teacher in Sacramento told her husband, "If anyone knows how to handle this with grace, it's him." Meanwhile, at Fox News headquarters, producers debated the narrative. A young producer whispered, "You realize if he responds calmly, he wins, right?" His boss frowned. "Yeah, but calm doesn't get ratings." Minutes before the event, Obama's team finalized logistics. No teleprompter. No pre-written statement. "Just speak from the heart," his aide suggested. Obama nodded, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "That's the plan," he said. Outside, a reporter shouted into a live feed. "Crowds are forming here in Chicago, anticipation is growing by the minute." Across the country, screens flickered in living rooms, bars, and subway cars. People weren't just hoping for a comeback, they wanted clarity, decency, something missing from the chaos of hashtags and sound bites. One tweet cut through the noise: "America doesn't need louder leaders. It needs better ones." Anonymous, no profile picture, but by midnight, it had over 500,000 likes. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Barack Obama prepared quietly. Not for a fight, but to remind people what real leadership looks like. The next morning, the city buzzed with speculation. Every morning talk show, radio segment, and podcast asked the same question: would Obama respond to Trump's insult? It wasn't just political curiosity, people wanted to see how the man who once led the nation with composure would handle a public jab aimed at his wife, outside the Harold Washington Cultural Center, reporters gathered well before noon. CNN, NBC, ABC, Fox trucks lined the street. A light drizzle fell, but early attendees showed up anyway, clutching umbrellas and holding handmade signs, "We still go high." Respect begins at the top. Inside, Obama's team moved with quiet precision. Eric Schultz checked his phone. Valerie Jarrett scanned the media coverage. "It's everywhere," she murmured. "Every network, every headline." Upstairs, Obama reviewed notes for the evening's youth mentoring discussion. The event had been scheduled for weeks, focusing on leadership and personal growth for young men from Chicago's South Side. Yet everyone knew the unspoken topic in the room couldn't be ignored forever. Michelle called that morning from Washington. "Calm but firm," she said, "don't let him drag you into it." "I know," Barack replied. "But if I don't say something, people will think I'm okay with it." "Then remind them who you are, not who he wants you to be," she advised. Those words stuck. By late afternoon, Chicago felt different. Streets were damp from rain, but crowds were still gathering, some for the event, others just to witness history. Across the street at a small cafe, two DePaul students sipped coffee, eyes glued to their laptops, waiting for what was about to happen. "He's going to say something, I can feel it," one volunteer murmured. "He always keeps it cool, but this time, it's personal." The other nodded. "If he does, it's going to trend for days." Across the country, television producers finalized graphics, headlines, and live feeds. Trump's team watched closely, one advisor joking, "Let's see if he can keep that calm act going." Deep down, though, they knew Obama didn't need volume to make headlines. As evening approached, the mood outside the cultural center shifted from curiosity to tension. Protesters and supporters mingled, holding signs and debating both policy and personality. Inside, the energy was different, calm, deliberate. The stage was modest, a few chairs, a backdrop reading leadership in action. Backstage, Obama adjusted his tie and took a slow sip of water. Eric Schultz entered quietly. "About 15 minutes. Every network is live. You sure you don't want to issue a written statement instead?" Eric asked. Obama smiled faintly. "No. People don't need a press release. They need to see a human being handle things the right way." As he walked toward the stage, a young volunteer whispered, "Mr. President, thank you for doing this." Obama placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Always good to come home." When he stepped out, the applause was thunderous, not the kind of applause for a celebrity, but for a man who had come to represent something larger. He smiled, waved briefly, and took his seat. Cameras zoomed in, commentators fell silent, the moderator began with routine questions about mentoring and leadership, easing into the evening. Obama spoke thoughtfully, drawing laughter when he recounted lessons from raising his teenage daughters. Then, finally, came the question everyone had been waiting for. "Mr. President," the moderator said carefully, "I know this isn't what tonight was planned for, but the current president made comments earlier this week about your wife's school nutrition program. Would you like to respond?" The audience hushed. Even reporters lowered their cameras. Obama leaned back slightly, smiled, and paused, the long, deliberate pause that made everyone lean forward. "You know," he began, "when you spend years in public life, you get used to criticism. Some of it's fair, some of it's not." He looked across the room, his voice calm but firm. "But when I hear someone take shots at people who've worked hard to make life better for others, especially children, that says more about them than it does about the person they're criticizing." The crowd murmured, waiting for more. "Michelle didn't do that work for politics," he continued. "She did it because she cared about kids growing up healthy. That's not partisan. That's just good parenting." Applause broke out, but he wasn't done. Backstage after the event, Obama sat in the green room, a towel draped over his shoulders. The applause still echoed faintly. His phone vibrated constantly, messages from old colleagues, journalists, even political rivals. Everyone had seen it. That one sentence was spreading like wildfire. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, taking a slow breath. "You think that was too much?" he asked, half joking, glancing at Valerie Jarrett. She shook her head. "No. You said what people needed to hear, not angry, not defensive, just honest." Eric Schultz entered, grinning. "You already have 3 million views on Twitter. CNN is replaying the clip every 10 minutes. Obama chuckled softly. "Guess I can't take that one back." Behind the humor, there was a quiet reflection, almost weariness. He wasn't seeking to go viral. He had spent years trying to lower the temperature in American politics, not raise it. Yet somehow, even in calm, he still caused waves. A production assistant poked her head in. "Mr. President, Michelle's on line 1. He stood, taking the call. "Hey," he said, tone softening instantly. "I saw it," Michelle replied, pride and concern in her voice. "You handled it perfectly. But it's going to be everywhere by morning." "That's not the point," he said. "I know," she said quietly. "You wanted people to remember what grace looks like." He smiled. They talked a few more minutes about the kids, her upcoming book events, and how strange it felt to still be drawn into politics even after stepping away. When the call ended, he stood silently for a moment, hands in his pockets. Down the hall, reporters waited for a post-event comment. Staff debated whether he should appear again. "Let's not fuel it," Valerie said. "Let the message breathe." Outside, the air had shifted. Reporters stood under drizzle, microphones raised, speaking urgently into cameras. Obama's subtle but sharp response dominated the evening cycle. Live on NBC, one correspondent noted, "It's being praised across party lines as a masterclass in composure." Meanwhile, at the White House, Trump watched the replay in silence. His arms were crossed, his advisors shifted uneasily. The quote, "When you spend your time tearing others down," was everywhere. "So, he's still talking about me?" Trump frowned. "Actually, sir," one aide said carefully, "people are saying he didn't attack you at all. And that's what's making it sting." Trump's jaw tightened. "We'll see how long that lasts." By late night, the internet was divided, but differently this time. Comment sections weren't just partisan battlefields, they were filled with reflections on tone, respect, and what leadership truly means. Even some Trump supporters admitted that Obama's restraint had hit a nerve. TikTok creators began posting edits. Obama's words played over footage of schoolchildren, speeches, and slow pans of American flags. One video racked up over 1 million likes within hours. The hashtag Lift People Up officially took off, started by a high school teacher in Detroit who tweeted, "This is what I want my students to learn from adults, strength without cruelty." Meanwhile, in his Chicago hotel, Obama sat near the window, city lights flickering below, distant sirens drifting up. Eric entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You should see what's happening online," he said, handing one over. "People are turning that line into something bigger. Teachers, activists, even pastors are quoting it." Obama nodded. "That's good. Maybe something positive can come out of all this." They sat in quiet reflection for a moment. The city's glow flickered against the glass. "You know," he said softly, "it's strange how decency has become headline material." Eric smiled. "Guess people miss it." The next morning, newspapers across the country carried the story. The Chicago Tribune led with, "Obama responds with grace." The Washington Post ran, "Class meets controversy, the moment that moved America." Even the Wall Street Journal, often neutral on personalities, called it a reminder of what presidential tone once sounded like. Back in Washington, Michelle read from their home, smiling softly. "That's my husband," she said to herself. Not everyone was pleased. A wave of criticism surfaced online. "He's playing the victim. Acting superior. Using old tricks." The divide remained raw and loud. By the next morning, Obama's line had become more than a sound bite, it was a movement. "When you spend your time tearing others down," appeared on headlines, t-shirts, and even church marquees. Every network led with it, every talk show opened with it. On social media, the phrase carried a tone rarely seen today: calm, reflective, undeniably human. Cable news replayed the Chicago moment again and again. One host called it a master class in emotional intelligence. Another noted, he didn't need anger, he had presence. Even longtime critics admitted the moment landed differently. In living rooms across the country, reactions were personal, not political. In Dallas, retired teacher Sandra Mitchell turned off the TV and told her husband, "That's the kind of thing kids should see. Not shouting, not name-calling, just composure." In Detroit, a pastor quoted Obama's line during his Sunday sermon, connecting it to real strength: "Sometimes the loudest response is silence wrapped in wisdom." In New York, high school students were tasked with essays about leadership. Over half the class quoted Obama, yet half the nation viewed it differently. Conservative talk shows labeled it a calculated PR move, an indirect attack. "He's not calm, he's strategic," one panelist said. This is about rebranding himself as the moral compass of America. Even so, the shift online couldn't be stopped. Hashtags like #RealLeadership and #LiftPeopleUp trended for 3 days straight. Stories of teachers, parents, and coaches who inspired change through patience rather than shouting were shared widely. It had become bigger than politics, a mirror of how people wanted to see their leaders. Meanwhile, in the Oval Office, Trump watched the coverage unfold. TV volume low, but the repetition of Obama's voice was relentless: "When you spend your time tearing others down, he's acting like a saint. Let's see how long that lasts," Trump muttered. His communications team looked uneasy. "Maybe it's best to move on," one advisor suggested. "Changing the subject might be smarter." Trump waved it off. "No, I'll respond my way." Minutes later, he took to Twitter: "Obama's always talking big but did nothing for schools except bad lunches. Sad." The tweet blew up, but not as he hoped. Replies poured in, mostly mocking the tone or praising Obama's maturity in comparison. One popular comment read, "You're proving his point in real time." For the next 48 hours, that line became a meme. Screenshots of Trump's tweet overlaid with Obama's calm words from Chicago circulated endlessly. Late-night hosts turned the exchange into the week's headline joke. What made it different was how ordinary Americans engaged. It wasn't just entertainment, it sparked genuine discussion about behavior. At a small church in Birmingham, Alabama, a women's group debated leadership. "I don't care who you voted for," one said. "It's about how you treat people." In Milwaukee, a barber shop played the clip for the 10th time that day. A man in his 60s looked up. "You can't teach that kind of control. That's character." Even young people, raised on viral content and impulsive reactions, were posting their thoughts online. One teenager on TikTok said, "Obama didn't clap back, he lifted up. That's how adults should handle things." Michelle watched it all unfold from home, her phone buzzing with messages from friends, colleagues, and strangers thanking her for her work and defending her legacy. She smiled quietly, letting the moment speak for itself. Late that night, Barack walked through the door of their D.C. home. He loosened his tie and set down his briefcase. Michelle greeted him with a look that said it all, pride mixed with exhaustion. "You broke the internet again," she teased. He laughed. "I didn't mean to. I just answered a question." She poured him a cup of tea and sat beside him. "That's the thing," she said. "You didn't yell, you didn't insult. You reminded people who you are. That's power." He leaned back, reflecting. Maybe that's what this country needs more of, reminders. Outside, the city was quiet, but across America his words were still echoing, in classrooms, coffee shops, and online threads that, for once, didn't end in arguments. Something in the tone had shifted. People weren't just talking about politics, they were talking about conduct, about example, about the difference between power and character. But while America was caught up in the afterglow of Obama's calm defiance, what followed in the days ahead would test just how deep that lesson ran. By Monday morning, the nation was in full debate mode. The weekend had been dominated by Obama's quote, and the question was no longer what he said, but why it resonated so deeply. Political analysts dissected it in interviews, sociologists wrote think pieces, and even late-night comedians paused long enough to call it a rare moment of adult behavior. Across the country, people were tired of noise, the shouting, the scandals, the constant divide. Obama's calm tone reminded Americans of something almost forgotten. Composure could still command attention. In New York City, morning commuters on the subway read newspapers with split images, Trump at his podium mid-sentence, Obama seated in Chicago, calm and steady. The captions told two different stories but shared one truth: tone mattered. A viral video soon appeared online titled "Two Presidents, Two Styles," juxtaposing Trump's comments about Michelle with Obama's measured response. It hit 10 million views in less than 24 hours. The comment section became a nationwide conversation about leadership, not political alignment, but personal example. "I'm not even an Obama fan," one comment read, "but I respect that man's ability to stay grounded." Another added, "This is the difference between ego and empathy." Meanwhile, at the White House, Trump's aides struggled to shift attention. "Sir, we can move the conversation to the economy or the border," one suggested during their morning briefing. Trump wasn't listening. He scrolled through coverage on his phone, jaw tight. Every headline repeated the same line: Obama outclasses Trump with graceful response. "We're not letting him control the story," he said flatly. A press release was drafted emphasizing the failures of the Obama-era school lunch program and highlighting Trump's commitment to restoring choice in schools, but it landed awkwardly. Reporters were no longer focused on policies, they were focused on personality. The more the administration tried to fight the narrative, the stronger Obama's word seemed to grow. Meanwhile, Obama's team avoided feeding the frenzy. No statements, no tweets, no interviews. Michelle quietly resumed her school nutrition advocacy, giving speeches at youth health events without mentioning Trump once. Her composure only amplified the contrast. In Chicago, a few days later, a mural appeared overnight on a South Side brick wall. It featured Michelle and Barack side by side with the words "Lift People Up" painted in bold white letters. The artist, a local college student, told reporters, "They inspired people to lead with grace again, that's bigger than politics." In Los Angeles, an elementary school principal started a campaign inspired by the phrase. Teachers encouraged students to write down one way they could lift someone up each day: helping a classmate, thanking a teacher, showing kindness. The project spread across several schools by the week's end. By contrast, in Washington, the West Wing's tone grew tense. Cable networks aired side-by-side footage of Trump's fiery tweets and Obama's composed remarks. A former Republican strategist sighed, "You can't beat calm with chaos. It doesn't work." Not everyone saw Obama's response as heroic. Some conservative radio hosts accused him of trying to play moral kingmaker. "He's not above the fray," one host shouted on air. "He's just better at hiding his punches." Still, the majority of Americans seemed unmoved by the criticism. A new Reuters poll showed a striking figure: 68% of respondents, including many independents and moderate conservatives, preferred Obama's approach to leadership over Trump's. In living rooms, classrooms, and offices, people started quoting his line in everyday conversation. "Don't tear down, lift up" became a quiet mantra. For the first time in a long while, political talk didn't immediately turn hostile. There was something almost nostalgic about it, as if Americans had been reminded that disagreement didn't have to mean disrespect. One afternoon in Chicago, Obama visited a small community center, the walls lined with posters of local heroes. A group of kids ran up to him, holding handmade signs that read #LiftPeopleUp. He laughed and asked, "So, what does that mean to you?" A young girl, no older than 12, answered without hesitation, "It means don't be mean just because someone's different. Be better." Obama's smile widened. "That's exactly right." The interaction went viral, fueling headlines once again. The story had transcended politics, it had become a teaching moment for the nation. Michelle, watching a replay from home, turned to one of her aides. This is what I wanted when I started that lunch program, she said. Not the food, but the values. The aide nodded. Looks like you got it. In a time when arguments had become entertainment, one man's quiet restraint had unexpectedly shifted the tone of the country. For a moment, it wasn't about winning, it was about reminding people that power doesn't need to shout to be heard, but while America paused to reflect on Obama's composure, the story wasn't over. The deeper meaning of that moment was just beginning to emerge, echoing through conversations far beyond politics. A week later, the noise had begun to fade. News cycles moved on to the next controversy, the next debate, the next distraction. Yet something lingered, not outrage, not mockery, but a sense that America had witnessed something rare, a single moment of composure cutting through the chaos. And people weren't ready to forget it. In Washington, Michelle returned to her usual routine, speaking at youth events and promoting her initiatives. Everywhere she went, people thanked her, not for the policy itself, but for her calm. You and your husband showed class when it mattered, one woman said after a book signing. You reminded us that kindness still has a place in politics. Michelle smiled, gracious but humble. We just try to meet disrespect with decency, she said. That's what we taught our daughters, and that's what this country deserves. Meanwhile, Barack took a quieter path. He avoided interviews about the incident, but his presence was still felt. That one sentence, when you spend your time tearing others down, had become part of the cultural conversation. It was quoted in classrooms, discussed in Sunday sermons, even printed on posters in libraries and offices. On the south side of Chicago, a teacher named Lena Green began her history lesson by writing the line on the board. She asked her students what it meant. A boy in the back raised his hand. It means leaders shouldn't act like bullies. Another girl added, it means we should help people instead of hurting them, even if we don't like them. Lena smiled. Exactly. That's how nations heal, one person deciding not to answer anger with anger. A clip of her classroom discussion posted online gained millions of views. People commented that they hadn't seen unity like that in a long time, and it came not from politics, but from children who understood something many adults had forgotten. At home one evening, Barack and Michelle sat on their porch in Washington. The sun set behind the trees, painting the sky soft orange, a gentle breeze carrying the sounds of distant traffic. It was peaceful, something they hadn't had much of during their years in the White House. You know, Michelle said, stirring her tea, I've been thinking about how that one comment of his turned into all this. It's strange, isn't it? Barack smiled faintly. It's not strange. People are hungry for decency. They've had enough shouting. When they see a little calm, they recognize it, even if they didn't know they missed it. She leaned back, thoughtful. Do you think it'll last? He shrugged. Maybe not. But it'll remind some people what's possible. That's all you can really hope for. They sat quietly for a moment, listening to the crickets, their conversation drifting to their daughters, upcoming projects, and how unpredictable public life had become. There was also a sense of relief, that even amid chaos, they could still lead by example without holding office. Across the country, commentators dissected the moment. Some saw it as a turning point, others called it a pause in an endless storm. But for many Americans, it was a brief restoration of something long forgotten, respect and disagreement. In Kansas City, a single mother named Denise sat at her kitchen table watching a replay of the Chicago interview. Her teenage son looked up from his homework. You like him? He asked. Denise nodded. Yeah. Because he doesn't talk down to people. He reminds me that being calm doesn't mean being weak. Her son smiled. Maybe more people need to hear that. Maybe, she said. Maybe that's where it all starts. Moments like that, quiet, ordinary, gave Obama's message life beyond politics. It wasn't about who was right or wrong anymore, it was about who could rise above. By the end of the month, several community organizations had adopted the hashtag Lift People Up theme for outreach programs, food drives, mentorship initiatives, even online campaigns reminding people to lead with compassion. The news had moved on, but the phrase remained. At a high school graduation in Cleveland, the principal quoted Obama's line during her speech, "You will hear plenty of noise in this world. But remember, real strength doesn't come from shouting the loudest. It comes from lifting others higher." The audience rose to their feet, clapping. Parents, teachers, and kids raised in an era where politics often felt cruel. Back in Washington, as evening settled, Barack closed his laptop after reading a few of the news stories. Michelle entered, carrying a stack of letters, handwritten notes from strangers. "People are writing from everywhere," she said, "teachers, veterans, even kids. They just wanted to say thank you." He flipped through a few, smiling softly. "Funny how the smallest things can make the biggest noise." She tilted her head. "You mean the quietest things?" He laughed. "Yeah. The quietest." There was a lesson in all of it, one that went beyond politics. Leadership isn't about dominating the conversation, it's about guiding it. Strength isn't about volume, it's about restraint. Respect, once lost, can be rebuilt through simple acts of grace. The incident reminded the world that real influence doesn't come from power or titles, it comes from character. In an era of division, one calm sentence from a former president managed to do what speeches, debates, and campaigns often fail to achieve: reflection. Maybe that was the message America needed most. When you choose composure over chaos, you don't just lift yourself, you lift everyone watching. That if you believe in that message, if you still think dignity and respect matter, share this story. Remind someone today, leadership isn't about tearing others down, it's about lifting people up. Because the world is always watching how we respond.